How's it going everyone, and welcome back to my Battlefield 3 weapon guide video series. The last episode on the MP7 was my last episode before the patch, so that makes this episode the first episode after the patch. So today's featured weapon is going to be the M16A3, and after talking about the stats of the M16, I'm also going to take a look at the attachments and give kind of a rundown of the changes to the attachments, which you can kind of put into practice on all the previous guides for the assault rifles. So you find the M16 in the assault kit, and it's unlocked by default for the US forces. You'll recognise this weapon as the first one you probably played with when you picked up the game, and it's unlocked for the Russian side after acquiring an assault score of 220,000. So first up, let's take a look at some of the general stats of the M16A3. Power figures come in at the usual 25 to 17, making it on par with all the other assault rifles in the assault kit. One of the good features of the M16 is its relatively low recoil patterns, which I think is what attracts quite a lot of players to this weapon. It's got the usual capacity of 30 rounds plus one in the chamber, and the rate of fire is slightly above average at 800 rounds per minute, so that kind of gives you a good balance between fast time to kill while keeping that recoil under control. So I think most people kind of forget about this weapon after ranking up a couple of levels after picking up the game. People don't tend to stick with the default weapons for very long. There's lots of other weapons that you get to play around with, but for the M16 you unlock it again after that score of 220,000, so you can then use it for both the US and the Russian sides. I think this is when people realise how good of a weapon it is, and kind of use this weapon as their go-to assault rifle in the assault kit. Just like the M4 and the M4A1 in the engineer kit, once you unlock the attachments in the early days with the default weapon, you'll have these attachments available when you unlock the secondary version of this weapon for the Russian side. This does kind of give you a head start when unlocking those later attachments, so it's a little bit easier than ranking up the other weapons that you unlock quite late on, right through to their flash suppressors and higher zoom optics that you get late on in the attachment grind. Now the FAMAS has been knocked off its throne, I think the M16 for me is one of my top choices for an assault rifle when using the medic kit. So far since the patch I've been trying out the M16A3, the L85A2 and the AK, trying to decide which one of these weapons I like best. We've got the L85, which has got that very slow fire rate and low recoil. We've got the AK, which has a very fast rate of fire and pretty low recoil, and then we've got the M16, which is kind of best of both. It's got slow recoil and that pretty moderate fire rate. But let's move on and take a look at these attachments that you might want to consider for your M16. The iron sights on this weapon are really cool, and despite having a relatively small rear aperture, the iron sights as a whole are pretty usable, so you don't really need one of the optics. This is a good job because you don't get the Reflex Red Dot Sight until after 50 kills with the assault rifles, so at least you can run around with the iron sights until you do unlock this attachment. But saying that, by the time you've unlocked the M16 for the Russian side, you'll probably already got the Reflex Red Dot Sight after using this weapon in the early days when you first jumped on Battlefield and used this weapons during your early ranks. When using the Reflex Red Dot Sight or the Cobra Red Dot Sight, you'll notice that the front pin of the weapon is still in place, which makes it quite a cool setup. So with that in mind, out of the Reflex and the Cobra, I'd actually go with the Cobra Red Dot Sight for the M16. Because of that half crosshair reticle, it does kind of fit well with the front pin, whereas the Reflex just kind of dots the pin and isn't quite as easy to see when you're in those hot firefights. So second up for the primary accessory, being a post-patch weapon guide video, I'm actually going to recommend no primary accessory. We've got the choice of the foregrip or the bipod, but since the patch the foregrip is no longer the go-to choice for the primary slot. Now these two attachments kind of tailor the weapon to either a short range or long range weapon. So you've got the foregrip, which makes you pretty good up close, but your long range accuracy suffers. And then you've got the bipod, which out of the two is probably the one that's most worth considering, since you can make the most of that deployability and get that lower recoil. But overall I'd go with just no attachment or stick with the underslung rail. And it kind of keeps the weapon more of an all-rounder, so you're not kind of limited to any one scenario. I wasn't too impressed with this change that DICE made in the patch, but after playing around with the weapons and the attachments, I actually do see where they're coming from, and I now actually prefer it this way. After the patch now, you can kind of set your classes up for specific roles with different pairs of attachments, such as the foregrip and the suppressor works really well because these two accessories work at close range but limit your long range abilities, whereas you've got a combination of, say, the bipod and the heavy barrel, which makes the weapon really good at long range but you kind of suffer at close range. This is kind of good news for me because in every one of these episodes I've posted so far, people have also watched my Modern Warfare 3 class setup videos I've always wanted, so some kind of class setup video series for Battlefield, so there's a chance now that I could actually create some kind of class setup video series. But that's something to consider for the future, so let's carry on with this guide for the M16 and take a look at the secondary accessories. Beforehand, the suppressor was my go-to choice, but after the patch, the suppressor has kind of been nerfed slightly. It's still good up close, allowing you to stay off the radar, and it also decreases that recoil of the weapon like it did before, which in my opinion was the best feature of this attachment. But now it kind of suffers at long range, and it's not really worth using, because in Battlefield there's quite a lot of engagements at pretty long range. After the patch, there's two attachments that I'd go for everyday gaming. They'd either be the heavy barrel or the flash suppressor. My basic rule of thumb is if you've got a weapon with a low recoil, you might as well go with the heavy barrel just to increase your accuracy at long range. But for weapons with a fairly high recoil, you might as well go with either the suppressor or the flash suppressor, with the flash suppressor being now the better option. Nowadays, the flash suppressor decreases the recoil of the weapon instead of increasing it like it did before the patch, and you no longer suffer with long range accuracy. So it really is one of the best attachments in the secondary slot. You've also got the options of tactical light and blazer sight, which can be handy in certain situations, but my recommended attachment is the flash suppressor, which will obviously reduce that recoil like I mentioned while eliminating muzzle flash. So that's about it for my guide to the M16A3 and a brief overview of the post-patch accessories and attachments. If you enjoyed this little video or learned anything new, please drop me a thumbs up to help share the video with your friends, just to give my videos overall more widespread exposure. If this is the first video of mine you've seen, don't forget to subscribe to stick around for plenty more of these Battlefield 3 weapon guide videos. Let me know if there's any of the weapons in this series that I've covered previously before the patch that you'd want me to recover, and take a look at the changes that have been made to the weapon and see if it changes my opinion of them. You can see all the previous episodes just by checking out the link to the playlist down in the description. So otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all later.